Welcome to Anything is Possible, the Boston Celtics podcast here on the Athletic Podcast Network. This podcast is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Get your TV together with the best of live and on demand. Learn more at directtv.com. I am your host, Sam Jam Packard. I call myself a professional sports fan. I am joined, as always, by the kid, the god, the legend himself, Celtics beat reporter from The Athletic. That's right, Jay King, ladies and gentlemen. And we are coming to you a couple of days before the start of the Celtics 2021-2022 NBA season, which is kind of wild because it wasn't too long ago that they were, playing another season. Very short off season, but we're back.
It wasn't too long ago they were playing another season.
Well, I had nothing. I prepared nothing for the opener, so I didn't know what to say.
Oh man, that was great. That was genius work. Very literary in your opening. I'm proud.
You know what is wild is that I saw some tweet that a year ago today is when Anthony Davis hit like that game-winning shot in the bubble. So in the last calendar year, there have been 3 NBA seasons. That's pretty wild. You can't. It's wild stuff. You were speechless. You were rendered without speech with that fact.
That one got me, yeah.
But so Media Day is next Monday. We'll come, we'll podcast after that and tell you all the riveting things that I'm sure all the players and coaches are going to say on Media Day, as they always do. But today we got questions. We got big questions. And these are what I'm a professional sports fan, so I don't have to think up these questions. But Jay King, he's a professional sports writer, and he covers the Boston Celtics, and he came up with 10 questions to think about as the Celtics head into training camp. So we're just going to discuss them. And I thought you did an appropriate job with the first question, which is the biggest question of them all. What's Ime Udoka going to be like? We have no idea.
That is the question, really, because I mean, you can criticize what Brad Stevens did 2 of the last 3 seasons, but he was a good coach. Like, the Celtics aren't replacing a bum coach. They're not replacing a coach who had very little success. Brad Stevens, his teams were regularly good to very good. They often overachieved, except for a couple of times when they didn't. And his defense,
talk about some poetic stuff right there.
The defenses were almost always either good to very good or great. And so Ime Udoka, like, he's not just replacing a chump. And I think, if it's not impossible to improve from Brad Stevens, but it's tough to get a coach as good as Brad Stevens. So Ime Udoka, he's got some pretty big shoes to fill.
Not even just in terms of coaching and like what he's going to provide X's and O's and on the court, but just his personality, his style. Like, Brad was so kind of robotic. Like, I just think of the famous clip of him, like the Celtics hitting a game winner and him having no reaction at all. It doesn't feel like Ime is like that whatsoever.
I've been told he is. I've been told he's more reserved than Brad.
That's insane.
Which would be wild.
Which is pretty wild, but like
I kind of fought back against that. Like, there's just no way.
Well, it's gonna be interesting to like how he deals with the media. I think Brad, at least early on, was very much like business, and which makes sense, and kind of got more comfortable before Brad started making his jokes. But like, that is one major thing about being an NBA coach, is that now Ime has to speak pretty much at every practice. Before and after every single game, he is the voice of the team now. And it's going to be interesting. I don't know if I have I'm more interested in this just because I have been in the scrums and know kind of what that interaction is like, but it's just going to be fascinating to see how he approaches kind of his interactions with the media. Some coaches will tell you a lot. Like, Doc Rivers will come out and say he doesn't think that Ben Simmons or doesn't know if Ben Simmons is an NBA point guard. Brad kind of played it more close to the vest and didn't really want to talk about stuff. And so it's going to be interesting for me to see how much Ime kind of shows about like what he's thinking and just kind of how expressive he is and how much he's just like, how much of it himself he actually shows to the media. And I guess we'll see on Media Day.
Yeah, and I think like that stuff doesn't matter the most of what a coach does. Like that's not his biggest responsibility as a head coach. But what you say in the media and how it's taken by the players matters. And I think Brad, like I don't know if I ever heard Brad publicly criticize a player for the way he played basketball once in the entire time I covered Brad, which was his entire Celtics tenure as a head coach. And I think sometimes he could have been a little more forceful, and sometimes guys would have been motivated by him being a little more forceful. But that's a tactic you don't want to use all the time because you can also piss off people too. And so I do think that stuff matters to some extent. I think it's notable that Udoka's already come out and kind of started to empower Marcus Smart by saying we're going to put the ball in his hands, and also put a little pressure on Tatum and Brown to improve his playmakers, which I think is obvious. You know, something that the Celtics obviously need, and especially with the way the roster is after moving Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. But the fact that he's going out and doing that publicly and kind of putting the onus on them to be more unselfish and set up guys and realize that it's not about how many points they score. Like, I think that stuff matters. And so I'm interested to see how he's different from Brad, the tone he sets, and just kind of what his priorities are in training camp, because Brad was predictable. Brad was like the most predictable person ever. We would know basically, depending on how the Celtics played, what happened, whether he'd come in and be upset, whether he'd come in and kind of just say, oh, it was I'm not mad about the effort. Like it was a tough loss.
Yeah, you could tell the process results loss. Like you knew what Brad was saying. The only thing that Brad was not predictable about was his starting lineup. Like when he started Gerald Green in that playoff game.
That was wild.
That was the wildest thing that Brad has done. But it's going to be interesting to see what as much as Brad was predictable off the court, he's kind of predictable on the court. Like you knew Brad was going to go to his some 3-guard lineups when he wanted to. You knew kind of like the things he was trying to do. He'd experiment more to the start of the season. Then he'd have things to rely on. It's going to be interesting to see what Ime relies upon early, and if he feels kind of that pressure to win early, or if he's more experimental, which I think brings us to the second question, is what are these lineups going to be? You tried to build a rotation for the Celtics, and it's going to be pretty difficult to obviously do that. But I think the one thing that really the Celtics are going to benefit from this year as compared to last year is they just have so much more depth, where if looking at the rotation you built, it only goes, your rotation only went 10 guys deep, and that's Pritchard and Juancho Hernangomez only getting 6 minutes. So the majority of your minutes are going to go to legitimate NBA players. And I don't know who the starter is going to be, but it's basically your bench is made up of some combination of Schroeder, Horford, Richardson, and then maybe Aaron Nesmith. That's just so much better. It's not wildly great NBA talent, but compared to what Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were surrounded with last year, it's a significant step up.
Yeah, and I think the biggest personnel decision that Udoka will make early on is whether to play Horford at power forward. And I think starting Horford at power forward is in consideration. And I think that's something the organization has thought about. Because if they don't do that, they're going to be a lot smaller, and they'll just play a lot differently. And then the other thing I think that there will be a trade-off when he decides lineups is shooting or toughness and playmaking. Like Schroeder and Richardson and Smart, they're just not good shooters. And so I do think that there will be times when Udoka has to sacrifice and put more shooting on the court, even if those guys aren't necessarily as good players as the other guys or as good all-around players as the other guys. And so I'm interested to see how that goes. We knew with Brad in the fourth quarter down the stretch, he was going to go to 5 skilled guys. He was not going to go with a bigger lineup. He would throw Gordon Hayward at power forward. He would throw Al Horford at center. He would often go very, very small. And I guess a lot of coaches do that in the NBA these days, but there are different ways to play. And I am kind of intrigued to see how that goes on. We gotta tell him, read it, Packard.
From Cedric Joshua Manalo, Jay, you're my guy and all, but Jay clapped your cheeks, bro, laughing my effing ass off. No, he did. But you should see me out in these pickup streets since then, it was embarrassing. I think like every time I kind of get down, I think about Jay not only beating me, but all the shit he talked. And then the podcast I had to do afterwards where Jay was even more of a jerk. I think it's actually produced better results on the court. And so, yes, I did lose to Jay, but I think it's fueled me to go out there, work on my shot more. You know, it's these like you got to take these losses and you got to get better.
You must have known going into it that the highest probability was that I was going to beat you, it was going to look ugly, and I was going to be an asshole about it.
Yes, I knew all three of those things going in.
Yeah.
I'm still disappointed with my effort and my result. Like my process wasn't good. So I'm still disappointed with the effort I put in. And so that still fuels me to like play better, put in more effort when I'm playing pickup these days, and just get out there and work on my shot. But you're right. I did, to turn a phrase, have my cheeks clapped by Jay King. Oh, this is something that there was almost a huge brawl when I was playing pickup earlier this week, Jay, that I wanted to get your perspective on.
Okay.
You're playing. You have the ball. You're driving to the rim. You get fouled. You yell out "and one," but you miss the shot. What's the result of the play?
And one is a false call. Like, that's not a foul call. So if you miss it and you didn't call foul, you call and one, that's the other team's ball. It's going the other way. That's 100%. Like if you're a basketball player, you should know that. There should be no brawl about that.
That is not what the dispute was. That was just the establishing facts. I completely agree with you because if you call out
what was the dispute?
If you call foul, just foul, and make the shot, what happens then?
Then the ball, that basket doesn't count.
That's crazy to me.
Well, that's the truth. That's how it goes. If you call foul, you basically have to choose between the foul and the possibility of making the bucket.
What is the point of that rule?
You're not allowed to.
That's stupid. It's the dumbest rule, and it goes against how the spirit of basketball.
What was the brawl about?
Someone made game point, but clearly got hacked and managed to, and they called foul and then made the bucket. And they were celebrated like they won. And then everyone else is like, nah, you didn't win. You called foul. And then it was just a screaming match about what that was. I the letter of the law, how people play is the rule you described, where if you call foul, it's not allowed to go in. But I just think it's the dumbest rule. I'm not going to be one to fight it, but I think it's very stupid.
Here's why they have it, because then you'd call more and more fouls. Like it would just open the door to you calling foul on any borderline play, and then getting it back if you miss it, or just counting it if you score it. Whereas the other way, if it's borderline, you're probably going to just let it go and try to finish the basket.
If you're calling a bunch of soft fouls, you're going to get a bunch of shit talk to you. I just don't think it's enough of a deterrent for people to call fouls. People either calling fouls when they're clearly getting smacked or they're not. It's so stupid.
Jam, the kid's kid Packard. We
can't give Cedric multiple comments to.
Cedric deserves multiple comments today. He's coming with the heat
to just talk shit about me.
You are the kid's kid.
That's a scary just thought of Jay King the father. But all right, thank you for that. Anything is potable pickup discourse. I think it's a dumb rule. I get your explanation of right there of trying to deter wild foul calls is the best explanation I've heard so far, but I still think it's stupid. But I digress. Your number 3 question heading into trading camp is, how will health change Jaylen Brown's game moving forward? Is he ready to make another leap as he's kind of done in each of his past 4? He's played 4 seasons so far. That sounds about right.
I don't know why I'm stumped right now. When did he started?
He's played 4 years.
Yeah, 4. Yeah.
All right. How is health going to improve that, Jay?
No, so I just thought that they were interesting comments that he said to.
He's played 5 years. We are wrong.
I just thought it was interesting, the comments he said to Mark Spears in the Undefeated about how his knee kind of hurt him more than he let on, more than the organization let on. And obviously we knew that was an issue during the season. There were a few times he sat out because of knee pain. he talked about his knee pain a few times. But then he pointed out a stat, which I thought was really interesting, which is that he had by far the fewest dunks he's ever had in a season. And sure enough, I looked it up, and he did. And it kind of shined a new light on some of the other stats, which was that he had the lowest free throw rate pretty substantially that he'd ever had in the NBA. He didn't get to the rim as often percentage-wise as he used to. And I do think part of that was just Jaylen Brown realizing I cannot be reckless. I cannot just drive with my head down and do all that, and kind of adding to his bag and adding to with more tricks. But if his knee was hindering him in those ways, I think it's important to the Celtics to have him kind of have an uptick again in especially free throw rate, but definitely getting to the cup a little bit more. And with the advancements he's made as a ball handler, as a shooter, and especially a shooter off the dribble, by the end of last year, he was shooting a ton of threes, and he was doing it at a very high clip. And so I just think his game continues to evolve, and I'm interested to see whether, if the knees are a little better. And it's something we didn't really talk about a lot last year, but if that does kind of push him forward back to where he used to be, at least in those other categories, while maintaining the shooting off the dribble and all that stuff that he really took an incredible stride in last year.
It's interesting in thinking about like what Jaylen Brown did like so much better last year. It felt like his shooting off the dribble, as you mentioned, but just kind of all of his moves in the mid-range, just kind of his footwork, his like fadeaway game, and his just ability to knock down those shots in the paint. He got so much better. And if that was just a product of him like not feeling necessarily as explosive to kind of get to the cup, if he's fully healthy and kind of do both of those things, it should be just like a huge step for him just in terms of his offensive game. But I think the other thing that was interesting about that interview he did was he said that his like main priority this offseason is getting better at playmaking, which I think he absolutely is going to have to do with the ball being in his hands more. But it just feels like every single year Jaylen Brown has added a little bit of something to his game, and it's gotten better each of the throughout the season. Maybe last year not as much, but now we see that maybe a knee was kind of the largest issue there. And so if he can kind of bring back together the explosiveness, the athleticness to get to the rim, and kind of add more free throws to a game in combination with the mid-range game, in combination with better playmaking, he has a chance to really kind of improve his game and step up. The thing that I thought was interesting is that both Sports Illustrated and ESPN came out with their official top 100 NBA players, and on both lists, he's the 27th best player in the league. Do you agree definitively that Jaylen Brown is the 27th best player in the NBA?
I think it's pretty clear he's the consensus 27th best player in the league.
I don't think there's any way to disagree.
No debate about that. But I do think as far as the playmaking stuff goes, and that's been an obvious focus from Udoka since he got the job, I think if there is a, upside to having a 500 season last year, it's that as well as Tatum and Brown played, there's no hiding the fact that it wasn't good enough. And there's no hiding the fact that the way they played was not conducive enough to winning basketball to overcome all the other crap. Like, not everything was their fault. There was so much that was not their fault. They were the two shining lights in an otherwise dark season. But at the same time, like, the guys who are good enough lift their teams up and help them get through stuff like that. And I do think, there can be a real benefit to that, to looking around and realizing, like, I know a lot went wrong this year, but also, like, I just wasn't flat out good enough as a playmaker, as a creator, as whatever else for the Celtics to be better than 500. And like, 500 is not a high bar. Like,
No.
It's not like, getting to the top seed, winning no, like 500.
Being in the play-in game. Like, you're right. That like the Celtics should be better, especially in the regular season, because there is more depth around these two stars. But for them to be at all like in the conversation about a contender this year, or for them to make progress in the playoffs, it is about those two guys And I would say more so about Jason Tatum, which leads us to the next question you have, making that step and being the guy who can lead you in a like playoff series. Like the Mavericks last year really didn't have a great team around Luka Doncic, but Luka basically carried them to 7 games against the Clippers pretty much entirely by himself. And is Jason Tatum right now, who there is some dispute of whether he's the 13th best player in the league or the 14th best player in the league, is he ready to take that next step where he's a top 10 player in the league? And there's no debate about that. And I think you presented some interesting stats about just like his progression last year before and after COVID. But it seems like he's another guy who's gotten better every year. Is he top 10 good though? Is this the year that he officially like I'm going to be an all NBA player no matter what?
Yeah, I think obviously I'm not sure about that, but like there are signs that to me suggest that Tatum is ready to really grow his game. I think by the end of last year, and especially in that Nets series, like he never played better than probably in that Nets series. That game 3 was one of the best performances I've seen by a Celtics player pretty easily. And I just think after that, your confidence has to be so high. He did it against Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant comes out and basically says, yeah, I put Tatum on the list of like greats that I've played against in the playoffs. Like he's that good. It was an honor to play against him. Then he goes out on the Team USA and his second leading scorer behind only Kevin Durant, higher than Damian Lillard, higher than everybody else on that team. And I just think the confidence has to be there. And I also think his year last year would have been looked at so differently if it wasn't for that one shitty COVID month. Like he came back from COVID and was not nearly as good as he was the rest of the season for 1 month. And I think that's very understandable. I think he outlined all the reasons that it impacted him and kind of lingered with him. And the stats, it's clear as day that month he was just not as good. And so I think you take away that month, you look at all the 50-point games he had down the stretch of last season, and then you look at his stats with and without Kemba Walker last season. When Kemba Walker was not on the court, his usage rate went way up. His points per 36 minutes went way up. And I just think this team is built more for Jason Tatum, more for Jaylen Brown. And so I just think all signs point toward him having a very, very big season, even by his standards. Like last year, he was very good. And there were months, except for that 1 month, like he was pretty great most of the season. But I just think like there's still another level for him to reach. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he'll start reaching that this season.
Yeah, if you just look at like from the 2019-2020 season to 2021, just in terms of pure counting stats, he like went from 3 assists a game to 4.3 assists per game. And like, that's just natural with his usage rate going up, but he's making those passes. And he went from 4.7 free throws a game to 5.3. If you just, I know you can't really like assume linear progression, but as you noted in his article, like he's gotten bigger. I think that's one of the things that he was really doing well in that Nets series was just getting to the rack and getting to the line. He averaged basically 26, close to 27 points a game last year. If he can get to, and I think 5.3 free throws a game is like kind of a low number for him. Like he has the potential to kind of average 8 a game.
7, 8 pretty easily.
And if he does that, then it's like we can be talking about him being like a 30 or like high 20s a night type of guy, which is like I kind of think like how dominant you need to be. If you can really take over a game, if you can control the free throw line. And I think he fully has that potential to get better. We've seen nothing in his career other than basically that one COVID month to suggest that he's like not going to continue being a great basketball player. Like everything he's ever done on the court has been very good. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see. Clearly it's his team now, right? Like last year, there it was his team's last year, but it's like Kemba Walker still kind of existed, and he was a star.
Kind of existed, yeah.
He was there. We can't argue he wasn't there. But how much does Jason Tatum like a lot of the basketball last year was ISO ball with Jason Tatum, and his usage rate clearly went up, and his percentages went down a bit, or at least his percentages from three, as he just like was taking more threes. Ime has talked about how like they need to be a better passing team, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see what Tatum's approach is. Is he looking to get his? Is he looking to like really draw fouls and get to the line, or is he like really looking to kind of establish this team style of basketball? So I'm curious to see like what his approach is going into year 5, where he is the guy, but is it his responsibility to make everyone around him better, or is it his responsibility to kind of get his stats and everyone else will fall in line?
And I'm curious to see how much better he can get off the ball, because I think a lot of the stuff for him, obviously he's an incredibly gifted one-on-one player. He's an incredibly gifted scorer. If he just makes it a little easier for himself by preparing for his touches a little better, whether it's coming off a screen harder, whether it's, getting a slightly lower post up, whether it's whatever. And then, like you said, free throws, he's apparently a little stronger now. And, getting to the line, playing through guys. And then the part of the Nets series that stood out to me the most, and before that, the Wizards game, the play-in game where he went bonkers. He just didn't let anyone off the hook. He was hunting out advantages. He was doing what he wanted, not what the defense wanted. And there was just a level of relentlessness that's just, it's tough to do, because you have to be in great shape. You have to, be incredibly skilled. You have to be always on the attack. But I think that's in him. And if he gets to that level all the time consistently, then there's no reason he can't be one of the actual elite players in the game, rather than on like the second tier or whatever he's been.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see like kind of what he's worked on and what he's really tried to emphasize in the offseason. I'm going to combine these next two questions, and if I was your editor over at The Athletic, I don't think I would have let these two be separate. But will the bench be good?
You had to have 10. You can't have
Well, come up with a new question,
go
Jay.
10.
Come up with a new question. But the questions were, will the bench thrive, and will the young players, which young players are the most ready? It's kind of the same question.
I disagree entirely, because I think they'll have at least 3 established players on their bench in all likelihood. If Horford and Robert Williams both start, they'll have Schroeder, they'll have Richardson, they'll have Enes Kanter on the bench. 3 productive guys who play pretty high minutes and have started a lot of games on playoff teams. So I don't think you necessarily need a young guy to be extremely good or very good or even like particularly good to have a very productive bench. So that's my thing. And the more I think about their bench, and it's a weird bench, because I think depending on how Udoka decides the starting lineup, like there may not be a ton of shooting. Like
it's pretty small, or it's pretty big.
It's either pretty small, it's pretty big. So it could be a weird mix. But I also think those guys are all productive. They've all been productive pros. They've all contributed to some very good teams over the years. And I just think that, especially the difference between last year and this year, where it's like veterans who have been there, who have done it, who have played in smaller roles before, or not like huge roles, not where they're like go-to guys. So I just think the bench has a chance if they can mesh together, and they may not, because like I said, it's a weird fit, but I just think like there's a lot of talent on that bench, from Schroeder to Kanter. Like those are 2 accomplished scorers in the NBA, guys who have done a lot of things in the NBA, and obviously each player has his holes. But I think it's going to be tough for second units to deal with those guys.
I think, okay, one, you did a good job justifying why that's a separate question than the rookies. But this is what the editing process is. I'm just asking the question to get you to think as a writer. I'm really enhancing you. Shout out to the Celtics, though, who does not have – they finalized their coaching staff. They don't do player development. They do player enhancement, which I like. Like, it's just – I don't know why they decided they needed to change the verbiage there, but the Celtics are about enhancing players. They don't develop guys, because it's about what the guys bring. It's not what the Celtics coaches are doing. They're just enhancing. They're not developing them. But the thing about the bench, which I think is interesting, and my dumb, optimistic, irrational brain has talked myself into, is that it is small and it does lack shooting, but the role, like the point of the bench is just to like support the guy, like the starters, and give some guys some rest. Like the bench isn't going to do a lot of times where it's like 5-man bench units. That's just really not how the NBA works. And so I imagine there's probably going to be times where most of the game you would stagger Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Like there's not going to be a lot of minutes when they're not on the court. And so having some smaller guys who are guards, with one being an offensive specialist and Schroeder, one being a kind of a more defensive guy and Richardson, and then having some depth at the bigs, with whether it's Horford or whether it's Cantor, those guys, or all four of those players, feel like they're complements to your two main stars who are going to be getting the majority of the minutes and who are going to be on the court the majority of the time. And so it's not like the bench has to come in and play this unit where it's just them five playing against their team's bench. No, they're there to basically support the two best players on the teams who are wings. So it kind of makes a little sense that they are smaller, and you would ideally like have them have more shooting, but or bigger and can kind of provide some toughness. But I think they fit a solid role of just being able, like they support the main stars of the team, and so who are likely going to be on the court. So I'm less concerned about the bench not having as much shooting, because I do think that, like as you said, they're established NBA players, and I think all of them kind of fit around the two main wing guys who we've talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I think the fit. See, I'm not sure about the fit yet. I think, especially with the backcourt of guys that can't really shoot.
Schroeder's the one is interesting because he kind of needs the ball in his hands. So I don't know if he like fits with what I was just talking about. But as I preface my entire thing, this is a rational Celtics fan talk, and so I don't need to be held to logic or reason when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, and then I do think, like, depending on how they use Horford, like he's just a guy who makes everything easier for everybody. He's a guy who can provide floor spacing from the front court, which they haven't really had since he left. And so it'll just be a different type of team this year. And I do think it's a significantly deeper team, especially from where they were at the beginning of last season. And where they were really through most of the last season. Like once they had Fournier, they had a number of established guys. They had some options off the bench, but they never really had those guys healthy, whether it was because Kemba was out on a second ever back-to-back, whether it was because Fournier was out because of COVID.
The top seven last year never played one game together.
They never really had that team. So, I mean, as you're looking at it on paper, they should be deeper, but we'll see. We will see. And they'll be even deeper if they get a young guy to step up, which is my next question.
That is your next question. Who do you think is more ready? Is it Nesmith? Is it Pritchard? And I think it's obvious. I was going to ask the question, like, who would they benefit from, like, stepping up more? I think it's obviously like Nesmith, just because he gives you 3-point shooting and the kind of defensive versatility that you look for. So if Nesmith can step up, I think he's gonna have clearly more of an opportunity to step up. Is he ready though? Is a bigger question, because it feels like Peyton Pritchard is ready to contribute in the NBA. I think he did so last season and showed that last season. It's going to be unclear what exactly his role is, but he feels more NBA ready, I would say. But I think they get more value or more benefit if Nesmith is the guy who kind of can take a step forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I guess that will always be Pritchard's burden, is like proving as a 6'1" white guy that he deserves to be on the court and he deserves to be in front of other options. But from a standpoint of what the Celtics need, like they could use a little more length, they could use a little more versatility, they could use some more shooting. Like Nesmith theoretically provides all those things. I do think Pritchard clearly had a better rookie season. Pritchard is clearly a very good shooter at the NBA level. He's going to provide a lot of range. I just don't know if he'll be able to play with Schroeder. And if he can, if that works and they can, make it work with that backcourt defensively, then, maybe he's a very good fit for that, because then you don't have to worry about Schroeder's lack of shooting as much, because Pritchard can really shoot the ball and he can provide a little more ball handling.
I think in an ideal world, Peyton Pritchard just comes in and significantly outplays Dennis Schroeder, and then you just cut Dennis Schroeder. Like
That's
if
wild
Peyton
talk.
Pritchard can just like be your primary ball handler when like for the bench and can run an offense.
So you're just going to cut a guy who's averaged 15 points per game for each of the last 5
Yes,
seasons?
after he's been outplayed by the second-year guy on the roster who can actually shoot from
Weren't
distance.
we just talking about the depth the Celtics needed? You're ready to cut Dennis Schroeder.
I said in an ideal world, Peyton Pritchard will prove himself better than Schroeder and earn that role, and then we can cut Dennis Schroeder or maybe trade him for a second-round pick. Who knows? I'm just saying I want to see Peyton Pritchard play some basketball. I'm a big Peyton Pritchard guy.
Yeah, I'm a Pritchard believer too. I just think because Schroeder is another small guard, it's just like a tougher fit for Pritchard.
Exactly. That's why we need to get the other small guards out of here.
The other competition, as I see it, is for the backup power forward spot. And depending on how they use Horford, like there might not be a whole lot of use for the backup power forward spot. But Hernan Gomez, I feel like he'd be a pretty good fit if he can be an offensive, not a force necessarily, but like a productive offensive player, then having a guy who's 6'9" and can shoot and can move a little bit, like could be pretty helpful. Jabari Parker, we've seen him score. We haven't seen him do much else, but he can
but he can score it, man. He can score it.
He can score. The man was just born with a gift. And then Grant Williams, like I still haven't crossed off Grant Williams as an option. I think over his 2 years, he's had a number of good games. Just needs to stop fouling all the time and become a little more of an offensive threat. And I think, maybe if the Celtics use him a little differently, and Ime Udoka asks him to do different things, maybe his passing and stuff like that can be more of a plus than his lack of spacing is a minus. So we'll see how all that stuff goes, but I think, a lot of the time when I'm like envisioning this stuff, I'm envisioning it in Brad's system and doing Brad's stuff. And I don't think Udoka will probably overhaul everything they've done, but I think it's not going to be the exact same, and they're not going to be asking guys to do the exact same things they've done in the past.
The thing that's wild, I'm just looking at last year's team. Grant played 63 games last year, and in those games averaged 18 minutes. So he went from having like a significant role, at least of just like you're probably going to get into this game, Grant, where you didn't even factor him into the rotation whatsoever. And I think that's like makes sense. And what does he bring? Like he's entering his third year, obviously had a down year, I think, last year from just like an offensive standpoint. And I think we saw a lot of Grant Williams last year. And maybe we're too hard on Grant Williams now that I think of it, just because he was forced to play 18 minutes a game in 63 games when it's just like, was Grant Williams ready or necessarily like deserve that big of a role? And so we saw a lot of, I would say, flaws in Grant's game in terms of fouling a lot on the defensive end, maybe not being as much of a presence on offense, but maybe in more of a reduced role where Grant's playing, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes a game, he can really be like, maybe the smaller role is good for him. Maybe he'll be able to kind of flourish where it's just like, Grant, we need you to come in and be like the highest energy and most physical guy on the court for these 2 6-minute stints. That's another reason why the bench depth just seems that much better, where it's like you don't have to rely on 18 minutes a game from Grant. Like you can try Wancho, you can try maybe some Enes Kanter minutes. But I think people have written off Grant Williams because we saw him just kind of struggle in his second year, which I think is natural. But I think he just had a little bit too much exposure last year, where now it's him and battling for minutes for like a much smaller role. I think you probably have potential to get a lot more out of him.
Yeah, and I think he still fits the mold of what the Celtics could need, as a guy who provides defensive versatility, has a lot of bulk. Like they don't have outside of the centers, they don't have a lot of bulky guys. And Marcus Smart, we'll give him the bulk. We'll give him the bulk.
Well, I don't know. Jason Tatum's apparently added like 15 pounds of muscle. Maybe he's a bulky guy.
But they don't have like the super bulky guys, the guys who
they got no one who's dummy thick.
Physical guys down low. And so Grant Williams, like that size could be pretty important. And so we'll see how he plays. We'll see if how Udoka wants to play. We'll see. Like, there are a lot of different factors that will determine the minutes, especially for the guys more on the fringe of the rotation. So I'm interested in seeing all of it. It's for the first time in a long time, like, we know nothing about the Celtics, like what Udoka's going to do. Obviously, we've had a few hints, but like, it's not as predictable as it was when Brad was the coach, and we kind of could figure on at least how the Celtics were going to play and what their strengths were going to be.
I think one of the reasons why we're like going into the season so blind is, one, yes, it's a new coach, but two, and you mentioned this in your article, we have no idea what the Celtics are getting from Al Horford, because it's absolutely not going to be the Al Horford that was here playing with Kyrie Irving, or the Al Horford that was here playing with Isaiah Thomas, where he was an all-star. Like, I just don't think he's at that level physically. And if he is, I'll be very pleasantly surprised. But he just didn't play with the Thunder really last year. And it's really hard to judge his season in Philadelphia just because it was clearly just a terrible fit, where he was playing next to Joel Embiid, who's just a giant individual. And so we really don't know what Horford's going to do, how he's going to be used. Is he going to be start? Is he going to be strictly a backup center? I'm a little cautious about Al Horford playing the 4. I know he can shoot more, and like, we've seen a lot of pick and pops with Al Horford over the years. I just think the spacing is probably better, and Horford's probably best utilized playing the backup center. But maybe it's the type of thing where he starts at the 4. He's like one of the first subs, and then he comes in and spells Robert Williams. But we just don't know what we're getting just from, I think, like a physical athletic standpoint from Horford. We know he's a great passer. We know he's going to like make the right decision on defense, but it's like, what is he physically capable of at this point in his career?
Yeah, and I think where that matters most is like the flexibility. You know, can he play 4? Can he play 5? Can you run as much offense through him? Can he still hold up defensively against guys like Embiid in a one-on-one setting when it matters most? And that's what we don't know. Obviously, the year in Philadelphia was not great from a fit standpoint, and I think he probably regrets going there in the first place. But you know, last year in Oklahoma City, the film was pretty good, and he could move. He shot a higher volume on threes, which is, you know, always a thing with Al Horford, that, you know, he was a less willing three-point shooter, I guess, and sometimes you'd want him to shoot a little more. He started doing that in Oklahoma City. Maybe he won't continue that in a place where he's surrounded by a lot more talent, but we'll see. And I do think, you know, there's like a baseline of what Al Horford will be, which he's going to be good for the Celtics. He will definitely help the Celtics. He'll give them, you know, great positional defense. He knows what he's doing. He's a mature basketball player who is going to spice up the ball movement and give them a level of just creativity that they didn't really have out of the 4 and 5 spot last year.
But is it going to be like 20 minutes a game, or is it going to be like 28 minutes a game?
Can he still reach back and get that like all-star level, or that playoff Al level, where he always seemed to rise it up when he was playing against Giannis or somebody like that? Can he still get there? And that's the question I have for him. That's the question I have about what type of impact he'll have. And it's obvious that he's still a good player and stuff like that, but you wonder if he still has that extra fastball that, like, in the big matchups, can he still guard Giannis? Can he still guard Embiid? Can he still guard Simmons, who I know you want to talk about him a little later?
Oh, we'll get to everyone's favorite, Ben Simmons. I think the other question for the Celtics is, how much do you want Al Horford, like how much do you want to rely on him? And I think a big part of that is, like, can he play the 4? But I think in the ideal world, like, Robert Williams is your starting center, and Robert Williams is getting the big minutes, and Robert Williams is kind of the guy carrying this team, at least in the front court. And I think Robert Williams is another big unknown, one mostly because of his just health, of like whether or not he can be stay on the court, which we just haven't seen him do really in his career. But Robert Williams took a lot of steps, I think, offensively last year. One, just like being able to step out a little bit and knock down a jumper, but we've seen Dime Lord make some passes. But if he can be, I'm like not really concerned about his offense, really, because Robert Williams, the man loves jumping. He can go up and catch a lob. He provides you that vertical spacing. Can he be a lockdown defender? Can he be like the captain of the defense where you can play lineups where you don't necessarily need Al Horford out there, where you can run Robert Williams and surround him with shooting? I just really like the idea of that with like running pick and rolls and the kind of spacing that provides. But can Robert Williams be your defensive anchor, your rim protector, a guy who's not like, he's going to block some 3-point shots, yes, but he's also like, can he stay out of foul trouble? Can he not jump on pump fakes? Like, is he going to take the step on defensively where he is kind of your go-to guy? I think he has the potential to do it, but in order to do so, he needs to stay on the court, and he just hasn't shown that he can do that.
Yeah, he's obviously a playmaker, like both ends of the court, playmaker, lob threat. He racks up steals, he racks up blocks. Like there are very few guys in the NBA who make as many plays as he does defensively. It's all about the minor detail, and he came so far last year in all the minor details with the positioning and stuff. But I think I mentioned this in my story, and it was one of the games that stood out as like the caution. You know, remember when he started against Embiid and picked up 3 fouls in like 2 seconds and was barely able to stay on the court? Like stuff like that is, if you're a starting center, that stuff matters, and it matters a lot. And you need to learn how to stay away from foul trouble. And I know Embiid puts a lot of guys in foul trouble, but it's like avoid the bad fouls, avoid the bad turnovers, avoid the bad defensive positioning mistakes. And he got so much better at that, like infinitely better at that last season. If he can continue to get better at that, and maybe take a page out of Horford's notebook now that Horford's back. And I do think Al, I do think the Al and Aaron Baines impact on Robert Williams when he was younger in his career, like he looked at those guys, was like, okay, that's how to be a pro. And now Al Horford's back, and Robert Williams has become a pro too. Like he works at it. You can tell he works at it because of how much he's improved, how much better shape he's gotten into. And we'll see. There's obviously a huge ceiling there. And he's obviously a lot closer to getting to that ceiling than he was a couple years ago. But how much closer can he get? And how much more solid can he get? Like the trajectory that he showed last year was just really, really impressive.
And I think like the Celtics can go, I think we talk a lot, or I've talked a lot about it, like it's up to Tatum to like become that superstar. But I do think the Celtics become so much more competitive in the East if Robert Williams goes and is like a legitimate starter, like a guy you can rely on to be there on both ends of the court. Just because I think he really opens up the offense, and he has so much potential and playmaking, as you mentioned. Like the Celtics, just bringing up the top 100 rankings, like they have Jalen.
You love those top 100 rankings.
I've been thirsty for NBA content. It's the only thing that's been basically happening the past week. But they only have 3 guys in the top 100. But if Robert Williams can even just like put himself on that list of just a very solid NBA player, a solid starter. They don't need him to be a star, but they need him to be a solid starter you can rely upon. I do think it just like kind of raises the ceiling for the entire team. And so it's going to be interesting to see how consistent he's able to be. I'm assuming the starting role is his, and how consistent he's able to be like in kind of what he does with that starting role.
Why do you assume that though? Do you think
just because I feel like confidence-wise, I think Horford will start at 4 and Robert Williams will start at 5.
Well, if that's the case, then start those 2 guys together.
I could see a world where Richardson starts and then Horford is the starting center. But basically I would imagine Robert Williams is going to and Al Horford are going to play similar minutes no matter who starts. Like I think they're both going to be around like 25 minutes a game.
Yeah, probably, as long as
I think it's just like you start Robert Williams to be like, hey, I think it's more of a mental psychological thing. It's like you're the starter.
Dunk this basketball.
Like, let's go. We believe in you. Yeah, absolutely. All right, we got 2 more questions left. The last one I think is interesting is what the hell happens now that Marcus Smart's your starting point guard? because he's probably been the best, I think, pick and roll playmaker the Celtics have had in the last couple of years. And I know these kind of stats are bullshit, but they give a good proxy for what's going on. Just looking at like the position estimate for Smart on Basketball Reference. Last year, he played 45% of the time at point guard. Before that, 23%, and then single digits in each of the 3 seasons before that. Like, he's pretty much played, and if you think about it, next to Isaiah Thomas, next to Kyrie Irving, next to Kemba Walker. He has not been the primary point guard or person who starts the offense in a long time. I don't think ever that's been his sole role on the team. He's done a very good job of being able to come in and kind of like run pick and roll and make plays, but now it is solely on his hands. And I don't want to say any tales out of school, but sometimes his decision-making, we'll say, has been questionable in the past. What's it like when now it's like Marcus Smart starting point guard? How does that kind of change what his game is and what he does?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll change his game a whole lot, but I do think it changes the texture of their team. For the last, 5-6 years, longer, whatever it was, the Celtics have had an all-star point guard and a big scoring point guard to rely on, and someone they've gone to a lot. In a lot of cases, it was Isaiah King in the fourth. It was Kyrie. Everything's running through him in the fourth. It was the first year, Kemba, at least at the start of that first year, like Kemba's going to have the ball a lot in his hands at the end of games. To now, the point guard is not one of your top offensive options or the top offensive option. He's at the very best third in that pecking order, maybe lower. And so it changes the texture. I think defensively, it's obvious. Like, they should be able to mash teams with big switchy lineups when Marcus Smart is their smallest player on the court. Like, if he's the smallest player on the court, you don't have to hide anyone. You can switch basically everything. And I just think defensively, and the numbers bear this out, whenever he's played point guard in the past, like, the Celtics have typically had very, very stingy defenses. It's just like, offensively, can you get away without having that level of scoring and shot making from your point guard? And I think you can. If the ball's going to be in Tatum's hands a lot, the ball's going to be in Jaylen Brown's hands a lot. You don't necessarily need Marcus Smart to be like a prototypical point guard. He's not going to be a prototypical point guard. That's just not who he is. But for someone who can run the offense, run pick and rolls, I do think the shot selection obviously is something that he needs to continue to work on and continue to iron out. But I'm pretty optimistic that will end up being pretty good for the Celtics. And it'll also just shift more of the scoring responsibilities toward Tatum and Brown, and playmaking responsibilities too. And I think that, especially the way Kemba played last year, giving some of those extra possessions to Tatum and Brown will end up being a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's the type of thing where it's like he's the point guard, so he's like going to take the ball up every single time. Like, I think we're going to see a lot of point Tatum,
point out.
We could also see the thing that I think is just great for the Celtics. I don't want to see any point Juancho. And it leads into your final question is, will the defense kind of stand back up? And I think it absolutely has if Marcus Smart's your starting point guard. Because if you just think back, teams, especially in the playoffs, could target Isaiah Thomas, could target Kyrie Irving, and could target Kemba Walker. You just get switches and you like try to post them up and you just kind of abuse them. You just can't do that with Marcus Smart. Even if you switch a center onto them, like Marcus Smart's post defense is fantastic. And so I think the defense with Marcus Smart playing, as you said, being the smallest guy on the court as that point guard, I just think it's going to be that much better. And we've talked a lot about the bench, but Josh Richardson, wherever he plays, is just a solid defensive player. Al Horford's a pretty solid defensive player. Now, Enes Kanter and Dennis Schroeder are not exactly those kind of strong guys, but they're your, 7th and 8th or 8th and 9th players on the roster. I think the Celtics right now have a core of whatever that core 4 is, plus Richardson, plus Horford. You're going to be able to put, no matter what, you're going to be able to put a strong defensive lineup on the court. And I think that's especially helps in the regular season. It's like, how many times last year did the Celtics just fall apart because they just had a terrible stretches of the quarters where the bench was in the game, and they completely fell apart and got down by 15 and then couldn't get all the way back. I just think given their depth and given their defensive depth, especially, I just think they're going to be in a lot more games this year, and it's going to be close. And there might be times when they struggle to score because the offense is too much reliant on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But I think they're going to be a pretty stingy defense, and that comes one with Marcus Smart, just having no weakness on that, on your closing roster, and two, just having kind of more depth. So I think the defense just has to be better than it was last year.
Yeah, and I think they'll be able to build some super switchy, versatile backcourts and perimeter rotation. Like if you have Smart, Richardson, Jalen, and Jason on the court, those four that's as flexible as it gets, or close to as flexible as it gets. Super flexible lineup right there. And then the other part of that is I do think Brad always was a great defensive coach, and Ime, we'll see. He was in charge of the Philadelphia defense. He has a big defensive reputation, but we'll see. It's his first time as a head coach. So that's one factor. And then the other factor, I think, is if they do play Horford at power forward, is that going to be a great defensive lineup? I think it has the potential to be. You look a few years ago, Horford and center X, whatever, the Celtics always had great defenses. Now they'll have Marcus Smart at point guard on top of that. And so I think there's a chance that lineup and having that size and having Tatum at the 2 and Jalen at the 3, that's huge on the perimeter. I think there's a chance that's a dynamite defensive lineup. I'm not sure about it though. Maybe I'm just scarred from watching Tyson Thompson, but I'm not sure about it. So we'll see.
Al Horford is not, as much as I love Daniel Tice, Al Horford at the 4 is not the same as Daniel Tice at the 4.
Definitely not.
And Tristan Thompson is bad at basketball. So I don't think we have to worry about the fear of the too big lineup. I don't know if it's going to be the best Celtics lineup, but I just do think the defense, no matter what, should be improved just based on what the personnel is and just the depth they have and what they can do moving forward. And so they have a potential to be I think a top 5 defense. I think the big question for them is how good can they get offensively, especially with their best defensive lineup. Ideally, I think their best defensive lineup involves Richardson and probably not Al Horford on the court, or maybe Al Horford at center in place of Rob Williams. It's how much does the lack of shooting there make it so you can't really play that defensive lineup? So it's going to be interesting, but you know what? That's why they're going to have training camp, and we're going to answer all 10 of these questions.
One day they will all be answered.
They will all be answered probably all at Media Day. All the players can be ready to talk about everything that's happening this season.
Media Day is Monday. Big day.
We will be back next week, probably to talk about Media Day and the opening of Celtics training camp. We're about an hour right now. We don't have to talk about Ben Simmons because I don't really have much to say. So if you guys enjoyed the show.
Hold on. Does that mean Ben Simmons is not potable?
It might mean Ben Simmons is not potable. Anything
is potable!